wayfaring stranger while traveling through this world of woe. Yet there's no sickness, toil, or danger in that bright world of which I go. I'm going there to see my Father. I'm going there, no more to roam. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over I know dark clouds will gather round me. I know my way, it's rough and steep, yet beauteous fields lie just before me, where God's redeemed their vigils keep. I'm going there to see my mother. She said she'd meet me when I come. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home. I'm just going over Jordan. I'm just going over home.
The second chapter of Exodus, verses 1 through 10, the birth of Moses. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, because, she said, I drew him out of the water.
Back in early May, I got a call inviting me to consider offering a sermon this summer. I was told that there would be two themes that the worship services would be following, and I chose the theme Homeward Bound, which is one that we're concluding today. A few weeks later, I received a copy of the summer schedule, and a vague sense of foreboding that had kind of been drifting around in my mind came into sharper focus. The Homeward Bound theme was to cover 5 consecutive Sundays, with Talia preaching, Shelby offering 2 sermons, Dar preaching, and then finally me serving as the caboose of this particular train. So I thought, what would be left to say on the 5th week? What could I hope to add? Would there be anything left on the platter by the time it had been passed around the table and came to me? So, as often is the case with me, I needed to readjust my ego. I remembered that worship at UCG is a community event that, in many times and many ways, deepens our spirits, challenges our minds, enriches our lives, and helps both to express and shape our faith. And it's not just because of what the preachers say, but equally because of who we are as a learning, growing, evolving people. We've been blessed with wonderful preaching at UCG over decades, and I think it's important for us to remember sometimes that it's not just because of who our preachers are or who they have been, but it's also because of who we are as a community. In dialogue with our leaders, we grow together. And so what I offer today, it doesn't stand alone. It's a group exercise in which we will continue to search for new depth and meaning in our lives. Our focus today is on the word home and what it means, what it evokes in our minds. Earlier, you heard a reading telling about the beginnings of the life of Moses and about how home became a moving target for him at a very early age. Our second reading is from the other end of Moses' life, as it's recorded in Deuteronomy 34, the first few verses of that chapter. Then Moses went up from the lowlands of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, eastwards from Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, the whole of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, the valley of Jericho and the Vale of Palms, as far as Zoar. The Lord said to him, "This is the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that I would give to their descendants. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you shall not cross over into it." There in the land of Moab, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died, as the Lord had said. He was buried in a valley in Moab opposite Beth Peor, but to this day no one knows his burial place. Home, something remembered, something to leave, something to seek, perhaps to find, something to create. What does the word home bring to mind for you? Are you able to isolate an image or a feeling or a sense that is evoked by the word home? Is it something from your past or your present or your future? After 72 years, the idea of home brings images of my childhood, my family of origin, and my place of beginning. We lived in 3 different houses, but all in the same small community. And what comes to my mind is not so much the houses, but the family and the community. I was lucky. This was essentially a good and healthy and mostly stable place and time for me. On a personal level, I was safe, I was cared for, and I mattered to the people around me. I was lucky in ways that vast numbers of people were not then and are not today. But it's also where I learned to accept racism, gender inequities, hostility toward people who were different than we were, and to see those as normal, acceptable, and in some cases even righteous. I lived there for 18 years, which was 25% of my life thus far. I did the math before the service. And I've lived in Gainesville for more than half of my life. Even so, my first thought of home is that place and time. Even though given the choice, I really could not return there now. I wonder how thoughts of home are different for you and for others. People of more recent generations are likely not to have been as rooted in place as I was. Some people were not safe or secure in their homes of origin. Some of you are from homes that were more socially progressive or more dysfunctional or had more, or I suppose possibly less status than I enjoyed. How do your early experiences shape your thoughts of home today? During one of the televised events following the aftermath of George Floyd's death, his siblings and a nephew spoke of the home they had shared with him. They remembered life in the projects of Houston, where folks, they said, didn't have much. But what they remembered was a mother who always welcomed playmates with food and friendship, where there was love, where there was a big brother, an uncle who cared for them and watched over them. I suspect that is something of the image they hold of home today, wherever they are and whatever they are doing. And when they have the opportunity to think of George Floyd not as a cause to be fought for, but as that brother, uncle, son, and friend. I'd be curious to know what the word home meant to Moses and how that meaning evolved through his epic life. Moses was an immigrant infant in a time when immigrants were out of favor in the land of Egypt. In spite of all the contributions those immigrants had made over actually generations, a king had come to power who did not remember or did not value those contributions, and who was threatened by the growth in the population of the Hebrew people. He introduced a policy of executing newborn Hebrew males as a way of addressing this population problem. So Moses' mother hid him when he was a newborn in order to keep him alive. But at 3 months of age, he was simultaneously rescued from danger and kidnapped to a new home. A home in the 1%, because of his discovery by the daughter of the king, who, like many of us, could not resist a baby, even a Hebrew baby. Home suddenly shifted dramatically for this immigrant child. No longer was his life in peril. He had found favor, and before long he enjoyed advantages, luxury, prestige, and opportunity that was unknown to and unattainable by other Hebrews. He had escaped the limitations of his birth, and how many of us have hoped that we could do that at some place in our lives? And serendipitously, his prospects shone very, very brightly. All he really had to do was to find himself truly at home in this new status. But things turned again for Moses. As a young adult out for an excursion, he observed an Egyptian overseer who was assaulting a Hebrew laborer. Moses snapped. His sense of kinship overcame privilege, and he attacked the Egyptian. He killed him and hid the body. Soon it became apparent that what he had done had been observed, and would doubtlessly be reported to the king. He knew then that his days of palace living had been forfeited. He fled. He escaped to a new land and yet a new home, a third place. In the land of Midian, Moses reinvented himself. He met and married one of the daughters of the land, whose father was the owner of sheep. Moses joined that family, sired a child, and joined the family business. Years passed, we are told. The king of Egypt died, and a new king came to power. But what was that to Moses? His home was Midian, not Egypt. His people were there and were not the Hebrews. He had been ripped from a home, he had fled a home, and now he had created a home. He had planted roots, he'd established himself. Young Moses became older Moses, settled with his family and his work. And you know what happened. If you want to make God laugh, tell God your plans. In dramatic encounters with God, Moses was drafted into a service he had not anticipated. The sufferings of the Hebrew people invaded his awareness and would not let him go. Reluctantly, but with courage, Moses returned, accepting a call to become the human instrument by whom God would deliver these people. Moses came back home to a dangerous place among the Hebrews, really a home he had never truly known. And life was disrupted not only for Moses, but for a people led from bondage to a very shaky kind of freedom, from being no people to a people called to a new destiny. I expect you know much of the story that ensues. If not, you can stream the movie, or I suppose you could read the book. Under the leadership of Moses, an entire people escape. They leave home where they didn't have much and began a nomadic existence that went on and on and on, where there were times that not having much became not having anything, where they had to look to the clouds for food and to a rock for water to drink, where sometimes freedom ran a distant second in popularity to the bondage they had left behind. Where now was home for Moses? For them all? A desert? Nomads? Wayfaring strangers? Or pilgrims? There was the dream. There was the pillar of fire held before them. Not a people who were lost, but a people who were being led. Not just wanderers, but pilgrims every day. Not without hope, even when hope was hard to hold, but with a promise being fulfilled in their struggles. They were at home in covenant with a forward calling. Their home was that long, difficult, lonesome, often humdrum journey toward a future in God, a strange kind of uneasy home. Then, within sight of the land, after years and years of wandering, as an old man, Moses once again climbs a mountain. From that mountain, the vista before him shows the extent of the land that was promised, the home toward which they had been bound for a huge portion of his life, the destination of the journeying and the work and the hardships, the place that was to be the opposite of bondage for this beloved community. He saw it with his own eyes, and then he died. How bizarre. He died and was buried in an unmarked grave, still homeward bound. Homeward bound, I suppose, does not always result in the anticipated arrival. Sometimes the destination is the journey in all its phases. Maybe that explains why during this very odd year, being home has been so hard for some of us. Young people ready to launch or recently launched have in many cases been called back home, held back, delayed. Safe at home doesn't sound like such a trial, but it has sometimes felt like bondage and imprisonment. Plans have been put on hold in an undefined sort of suspended animation for many of us. I heard an interview recently with a scientist who is part of a research team that is spending a year on a ship in the Arctic ice fields. Her journey began about 6 months ago, before the arrival of the pandemic. And now in May, it was time for her to rotate back to her home in California. In the interview, she said it would be very hard for her because, she said, home is not a place. It is how you live your life, and that will all have changed. What has been so difficult, I think, in our journeys this year is not that we have been homebound, but that we have had to change how we live our lives. We have had to be at home in new ways, unanticipated and often unwelcomed. But perhaps that's what it means to be homeward bound as pilgrim people. It's a dynamic process. It is the journey itself with all its changes. It's the places where our eyes become more open, our hands become better occupied, our hearts come more in tune with our humanity. It's the pain that stirs us toward a future, through the obstacles and failures toward that which we can see from afar but have not reached, and in truth may not reach, but by our calling must reach toward. Our home shifts, changes, evolves, but it is always by grace now, this present, this moment, this challenge. May we have the grace, as individuals and as a people, to embrace this wandering kind of journey as our pilgrim home. Amen.
Remember to join us each Sunday at 11:15 a.m. for Sunday seminars on Zoom. The link can be found in your email bulletin.
Thank you for joining us at the United Church of Gainesville today. To learn more about who we are and what we believe, and to support our ministry, please visit ucgainesville.org.